Hello, and welcome to episode 565 of the official EstablishedRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. For part 3 of this best ball series, I am once again joined by two of the best ball grinders on the planet. Best Ball Mania 1 champ, Justin Herzig, star of our YouTube streams twice a week, and Michael Leone, leader of our newfound big analytics department and author of the Best Ball Manifesto. Leone, how's it going?
It's going well. Excited to talk a little DraftKings best ball here.
Yes. Herzig, how's it going?
Good to be on pause instead of just live streams. This is fun.
Yes. It's enough already with the live streams. My God. Okay. Gonna get burned out. I'm worried about you. Let's go to... So this is part 3 of a 6-part series. And part 1, which I implore you all to listen to, is the base. What to think about when you're on the clock. In part 2, we covered underdog strategy and how to approach it. DraftKings strategy and how to approach it, to me, is very, very, very different. And the reason that it's different, in my opinion, is almost strictly due to the scoring system. We're talking about full PPR with bonuses. Now, what does that mean? That means that quarterbacks are worth less. In other words, their scoring is going to take up a smaller part of your total scoring. Pocket passers are worth more because they can hit the 300-yard bonus. So guys, you can take Kirk Cousins late. You can take Trevor Lawrence later last year at least and start to think about those 300-yard bonuses more than the freaks who are running a ton. Also, it also means that wide receivers are incredibly valuable because when they stack up the PPR points, they often also stack up the bonus. It also enhances stacking more. There's just an overwhelming amount of reasons why it should be, in my opinion, very wide receiver. We should be very wide receiver heavy on DraftKings. We should be looking at 0 and hero RB builds, and we can, if we want to, and I typically want to. I like taking 3 quarterbacks on DraftKings later, and I'm okay with all 3 of those being pocket passers. The great thing about DraftKings, Justin, and the reason I think I won there last year was because people aren't adjusting correctly for these things. And it's like almost backwards what people are doing on DraftKings. So I know I've said a lot here, Justin. Any thoughts on applying DraftKings scoring system specifically to our strategy?
Yeah, I mean, just for beginners, DraftKings is a sports book. It's a DFS platform. It is far from known for best ball. And the people you're competing against are often people who have never done best ball before or aren't familiar with it or aren't uploading their own rankings. And so the ADPs there are far more structured for what people think about from maybe, their fantasy football redraft or maybe the names they're more familiar with compared to, of course, underdog, which we just talked about last podcast. But obviously everyone that's an underdog right now in May is basically a degen. So from this, it gives us such an opportunity if we're drafting smart, if we're drafting correctly with the DraftKings. I think you touched on a lot of great things. I'll throw one more in there, the tight end position. In this structure, because it's PPR, because the 100-yard bonus, tight ends, if you go elite, are actually that much more valuable. But because you're getting 3 roster spots, and because you're getting 20, so you have it more easily able to get 3 roster spots, going late tight end and grabbing 3 or maybe even 4 is also perfectly viable. But without a doubt, wide receivers are so important, and they're not being taken that way.
Yeah, exactly. You can get wide receivers later on DraftKings than you can on Underdog, which absolutely blows my mind. Leone, any thoughts on DraftKings specific scoring systems here? And honestly, I actually think stacking is worth more on DraftKings, and that's just my gut. I actually haven't looked at the data on that, but maybe you have.
Well, if you think of it from a DFS perspective, we're always more into stacking on DraftKings than FanDuel in terms of the size of the stacks because more guys can get there in different ways. You can have one guy rack up catches and get the bonus, another guy get touchdowns. FanDuel, it's a little harder to do that when you don't have the 100-yard bonus and it's half PPR. So I think there's some credence there, even though it's not perfectly analogous to DFS. And in terms of the wide receiver stuff, I think elite wide receivers are that much more important because they're hitting the bonus more often. The volume matters more when it's full PPR. On underdog, sometimes, not always, you can make up for quality with a little bit of quantity where you get these guys, they go, 2 for 60 and a touchdown, right? That's a pretty big day on a half PPR site. On a full PPR site, that's, that's pretty tame. That someone who's just going 8 for 80 is going to beat you. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then in general, drafting on DraftKings, I just like to tell people like the interface can be a little bit tougher to get used to if you're used to the underdog one. So the clock doesn't pause overnight. Your ranks, if you upload them, aren't going to update after you've already started a draft. So there's just little things to be aware of where it's going to be a little bit different. Now we can get more of an edge if we're willing to overcome that and put in more work, because as we've noted, it's harder for other people if it's hard for us, and especially if it's more casual drafters.
Oh, yeah. I love it. The worse the interface is, the worse the UX, the worse the UI, the more I want to be on there.
More diplomatic than you're.
Yeah, I want to be on there grinding. Exactly. That's what I want for sure. Okay, so I think hopefully people who are listening to this play DFS on DraftKings, they understand how important the scoring system is. To me, that is our biggest edge on DraftKings. Other things that I want to talk about on DraftKings is just how big this tournament is. And Leone, I'm not sure how closely you've looked at this DraftKings thing. $10 buy-in, 1.2 million entries. 1.2 million entries in best ball at a $10 buy-in. Now we have same thing as underdog. Week 1 through 14, the top two are going to advance. Week 15 is a 12-person group. The winner advances. Week 16 is a 12-person group. Winner advances. So not as big in week 15 and 16. Week 17, though, is a 1,364-person final. Payouts are $1 million to first, $526K to second, $400K to third. 10th is $100K, 10% of first. So it's a little bit flatter here in this 10 on DraftKings. I'm not sure we can adjust our drafting strategy for this, but any thoughts on the way DraftKings is doing their payouts? And they do not have a regular season prize, by the way, whereas Underdog does.
Yeah, so not having the regular season prize, I think, matters a little bit. In the Underdog pod, we covered there are some things that you might pivot to if you're aiming for that. That's obviously not going to be the case here, where you're only going for the playoffs. The 12-team versus 16-team field to advance isn't a huge difference. From a sweat perspective, I kind of like the 12-team just to improve your odds of getting to the finals. Now, when you get to the finals, it's a larger field again. You might, like if you're getting really into the weeds, you might start thinking about, combinations that are going to be highly owned. It is something that pops into my mind. It's tough when it's a draft that goes to full draft season, though, because ADPs are going to shift. So I know, Adam, we've talked about with the Bills, you start Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen, you throw in Ramondre Stevenson in the third round for that correlation. I wonder if you're better off not taking Ramondre or taking somebody else, because even though Ramondre gives you the week 17 correlation, it's so popular. I guess the counter to that, though, is DraftKings is casual enough that I don't know if we've reached the break-even point on that yet, but it's just something that I'm thinking.
I don't think 99% of the field on DraftKings is not thinking about week 17 stacking, whereas on Underdog now, I would say of the people drafting now, at least 50% are thinking about week 17 stacking on Underdog, not happening on DraftKings. Herzig, any more thoughts on the payout format here on DraftKings?
Yeah, I mean, hey, I want to give credit to DraftKings a little here, because there have been some improvements from a UI interface. You can actually upload rankings now. There's rumors of a draft board coming, but more than anything else, this payout structure is fantastic. Going from, I think, $1 million to 500,000, 400,000, 300,000, that's a really good, fairly flat payout structure. Doesn't change the way that I draft or, trying to get out of a 1,300 person field, getting first getting second is really just, pretty much random chance. But a 1,300 person field, holy crap, week 17, this may no longer be the top of the pyramid if we're talking for DraftKings. It may move a little more towards the middle. That is so important, combined with only 1 out of 12 instead of 1 out of 16 for the 2 previous rounds, and so top heavy, even though we're talking not first place top heavy, but out of 1,300, you finish in the top 1%. That's what, top 13? Yeah, you still need to really finish high up there. And that's where week 17 correlation, I think, is that much more important. Yeah.
Agreed. Just one more thing on hero RB and zero RB. The way I started my team last year in the 3-3-3 was Steph Diggs first, then Saquon, and then I just kept going wide receiver. T. Higgins in the 3rd round, Jalen Waddle in the 4th round, Chris Godwin in the 5th round, Devontae Smith in the 6th round, MVS in the 9th round. Took even more, Wan'Dale Robinson in the 14th, Zay Jones in the 15th, and I took a shot on Danny Gray in the 20th. But man, I mean, so many wide receivers. I think a lot of people, because it's a 20-round draft, Justin, might be like, well, I want to get 3 or 4 tight ends. I want to get, 6 or 7 running backs. I still want to use, even though I have 20 spots, I still want to have like 9, at least 8 wide receivers on my team in this format. But we can still do that and come away with 3 quarterback and 3 tight ends. So how do you think about allocating number of players in a 20-round draft on DraftKings?
Yeah, I think you touched on it. And what I'll say is when I'm allocating those as well, I also really want to focus on that game 17 correlation. I think an example is 2 years ago in their big tournament with $1 million up top. I was sitting in first place going into the final night, ended up dropping to, I think, 4th, but it was on the basis of a Cincinnati, Kansas City game stack. And at the very end of it was Darrell Williams putting up like a 25-pointer or something, that the only reason I pretty much drafted him was because of that game stack. And so now when we're talking about positional allocation here, for me, the stacking in that game stack is that much more important, where in those later rounds, your 18, 19, 20, I'm first focusing on who can I find a game piece of that correlates with the rest of my lineup from a game stack, and then deciding whether it is, what position it is. I think what you can really take advantage of with the DraftKings styles. I know earlier you talked a little about kind of maybe stacking is actually more important on here versus FanDuel. I kind of actually feel the opposite, because touchdowns correlated FanDuel means more. Here, you can actually take, and this is what Leone said, 2 wide receivers from the same team, and both of those can be highly correlated because they can both go off without needing to take each other's touchdowns. They're just getting a lot of passes and such. And so I think a great way on the DraftKings is to think about game stacks even without the QB. Because yes, you will have your QBs hopefully stacked as well, but even digging into not just 1v1 mini stacks, but you can go like 2v2s and still focus on a game, because if that game does shoot out, that QB might put up 35 or might put up 30. It's pretty easy for your QB to get pretty close as well and still kind of make it competitive. But now you're getting as much action as possible of these potential blowout games.
Yeah, there's also situations where just because of how strong a bet is individually and how players accumulate points, where we're high on the receivers but not the quarterback, and it looks weird. One's Jacksonville, for example, but I've built out some teams where I have 2-3 Jacksonville pass catchers about Trevor Lawrence. You can bring that back with Miles Sanders, Mingo, someone from Carolina in week 17. But yeah, definitely don't be afraid to stack multiple pieces from a group of pass catchers you like, even if you don't have the quarterback.
There are some smaller field tournaments on the site. If the 1.2 million entry field is not for you, there's a 555, but that is still kind of big, 5,200 entries and 1 million to first, 150K to second there. So be careful on the payout structure there. Be sure you're optimizing for first place. There's also a $250 single entry with 50K to first. The 333 last year was a 3 max, and that will likely launch later. But yeah, some of the same things that we talked about for the smaller stuff on the Underdog show, I think apply here to DraftKings. Smaller the field, less you have to worry about. Week 17, still want to be stacking when possible. That's going to do it for this look at DraftKings. We'll be back next time to take a look at Drafters, which is a unique format, regular season only. Oh, baby. This sounds like my kind of format. For Herzig, for Leone, for producer Luke, I'm Adam. Good luck, everybody.